Next week on Thursday, chapter 36. Trees in the Dark. An anxious month crawled by with no word from my defunct lawyer's office. I had no intention of probing further into the matter. Our family was more than ready to pick up the frayed threads of our life and move on. The bruise in my heart throbbed each time I drove past the building at the corner of Main Street. A tall sign advertised space for rent. The brass Wiseman and Associates plaque still remained on the wall by the door. I took to averting my gaze whenever I sped by. On impulse one evening, I slowed down and drove into the premises. The wet, pitch-dark night dripped all over the car as the wipers thudded against the windshield. The parking lot was deserted, and I became oppressed by a sudden sense of apprehension. A dim fluorescent bulb struggled in the shed behind the two-story edifice. Trees, ghostly sentinels, towered above me, bowing and creaking in the turbulence like dancers at a cotillion ball, their swaying branches bending, shaking hands, then swinging away. I slowed down to a crawl and swallowed hard to dislodge the rock in my throat, assailed by an uninvited rush of mind movies. Droplets pricked at my eyelids and began a salty journey towards my chin. I paused for a brief second at my usual parking spot. A deluge of cameo moments poured all over me. 6 months into the diagnosis, Harold still bounced with vitality and optimism, though his speech had begun to slur considerably. There was also a marked weakening in his little finger. "Well," he said, extending his hand, "I've been exercising it. See, it's getting stronger. I'm sure of that." I was all out of platitudes, so I smiled when I found myself at a loss for words. I smiled a lot. An urgent pre-court consultation on an evening late in the summer sent me to the office. I found Harold wearing a long-sleeved shirt and one of his avant-garde ties, the zany tie with the Edwardian lady on it. I wrapped both arms around my bulky legal file and stood up to leave. He rose to his feet, mumbling, "I'll walk you to the car." George drove in as we rounded the corner into the parking lot behind the building. He stuck his head out from behind the wheel of his ramshackle conveyance and exchanged a few words with his employer. We waved when he drove away. We chatted for a while before I glanced at my watch and reached for the handle of the driver's side door. Harold pressed his cheek against mine in farewell, then shambled back to his office. The drapes were drawn tight at the wall-sized first-story window. I saw my friend in the swiveling office chair at his desk, or in the final months, watching for my arrival. "I love the dress you're wearing," he said last summer about a new denim outfit. "It's very flattering. Oh, and I like how the shoes match." Not much escaped his notice. I looked into the dim dusk. He was at the window, tapping on the tinted glass, grinning and making gestures to suggest I return for a final hug. Once I used my car keys on the glass to attract his attention, to wave one more time before I drove away. My thoughts careened on their riotous rampage. I rounded the corner and moved towards the front of the property. I stepped on the brakes, ground to a halt, and closed my eyes. I slipped a folder of documents on Annie's table and scurried back to the car. Harold's voice brought me to a halt. He stood in his shirt sleeves on the balcony at the top of the short flight of steps going up to the front side door. The brown eyes twinkled. "You left without saying hello," he complained. The ground was thick with ice and snow. "You'll catch your death of cold," I chided and shook my head in mock disapproval. "It's freezing." The eyes danced. He retorted, "Oh, but I was born in this country. You weren't. I don't feel the cold like you do." Memories are strange, precious things. Harold was everywhere in the grudging light of the weakling moon. I negotiated the narrow corridor between the squat building and the wall separating it from the adjoining property. The spot reserved for the silver SUV was empty. The familiar constriction gripped my throat. Harold stood by the open passenger side door of his vehicle. It towered over his reed-like wispiness. Dusk was falling, and crouching shadows hovered all around us. He leaned forward to hug me and lost his balance. I grabbed his elbow in the nick of time. He felt weightless. He straightened up as if nothing untoward had occurred. His lips moved. He mouthed, "I love you." He never forgot to say, "I love you," during those last months, over and over again, to everyone he cared about. A murky well of aloneness clouded his eyes. He clambered awkwardly into the driver's seat. I blinked and stepped on the accelerator. The car eased itself, all but grazing the wall, through the narrow passage at the side of the building. The entire exercise lasted no more than 5 minutes. The drizzle heightened the hazy glow around the street lamps. The trickle from my tear ducts meandered along my cheeks as I edged towards the thoroughfare. I tasted brine on my lips. The bruise ceased to sob. My ghosts were laid to rest. On Thursday evening, the following day, I made my weekly pilgrimage to the hospital to sit with Joe and his semi-conscious wife. A framed needlepoint sampler hung on a wall in the long-term care ward just outside a patient's room. It was dedicated to the staff in lettering engraved on a small brass plate. Cross-stitched on embroidery canvas beneath the glass was the poem, "Footprints." I froze in my tracks. Footprints? Where did it come from? To be continued.